Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Dirt Trail Running Podcast. We're here with Coffee with Coaches. I'm Coach Loretta, here with Coach Reese. So welcome. Today, we're going to dive in and talk a little bit about and pick apart the difference between a 50K and a 50 miler. So thinking about, the things that we look at differently when you're moving up in that kind of distance or moving to that distance.
Absolutely. And I think it's a great topic because there's so many of us who kind of get, I think, like distance, distance anxiety. Like if you're going from a marathon to a 50K, just the fact that you're going further than you've ever gone before can bring a certain level of thinking, can I do this? Can I actually accomplish this? And I think that's kind of magnified because the difference between a 50K and a 50 mile is about 18 miles or so. So just under. So I think this is a great topic, and it's really going to shed some light on how we help coach our athletes through making jumps in any of their training. So I guess my first question is when somebody comes to you and says, hey, I'm looking to run my first 50 miler and I've done a couple 50Ks and I feel okay at the distance, what is your immediate thought as to how you're going to talk that athlete through jumping up in distance?
Okay. I think personally, one of the biggest things that's a difference between going beyond the marathon and 50K and beyond is really nutrition and hydration. I think that's a huge piece that you really need to work on. I feel like 50K and under, you can get by with just kind of winging it. But once you get up into the 50 miles, you can't. So you need to really have a solid plan. And then just talking about this time commitment, I think there's a bit more time commitment with training. The 50K versus 50 miles, putting a little bit more time in on your feet. And then also mentally, you're going to be spending a lot more time out there, 50K versus 50 mile. But I also feel like personally, I don't think that you have to make certain increment jumps, either. I don't feel like you have to go from the marathon to the 50K to the 50 mile, the 100K to the 100 mile. I think you can move to the distance that you are excited about going to next without really making steps up the ladder. If you feel more comfortable doing steps up the ladder, you certainly can do that, but I don't think you have to be stuck to that. What's your thoughts on that?
Oh, I think that's fantastic. And, I do so you mentioned a couple of things. You mentioned hydration and fueling during the race. I think that is huge because you're going to be out there for a lot longer than in a 50K. And just like you said, sometimes when you hit that bonking point in a marathon, you're already mostly done with the marathon anyways. When you hit a bonking point in a 50 mile, sometimes you still have another 20, sometimes you have another marathon left to go, right? So during the race, hydration and nutrition is important. And I like too how you mentioned about training. There's a little bit of an extra time commitment. So I guess I would kind of like to focus on the training component right now, and then maybe let that lead up to the racing strategy and racing tactics. And I think to go off of that vein, my line of thinking is I want to see somebody be a little bit more consistent in training, as well as maybe consistently hit a little bit more volume, whether that's in the long run or just overall. So I think with a marathon and 50K training, you can kind of get away with, having some unplanned down weeks or missing a couple runs and not having it really be a big deal, or maybe you didn't really get in that that 20 mile or that 22 mile or 24 mile long run that was kind of key in your buildup. I think that is okay, because if you can run 16, 17 miles, I think that you have what it takes to go the 50K distance. However, when people are transitioning to the 50 mile distance, I think that's when we have to be a little bit more consistent in training and just making sure that we're hitting those key markers and building up over a long period of time, or that we're really consistent about making sure that, hey, those key days, once it comes down to business, 8 to 10 weeks out, hey, we're going to be hitting those long runs, or we're going to be hitting those back-to-back days. And maybe those are the times where you need to find an extra little bit of motivation, because sometimes when you're preparing for big things, sometimes it's not woohoo, this is the most fun I've ever had in the moment. Sometimes it's okay, I need to do this because there's value in it and I want to use it as a stepping stone for my ultimate achievement. So sometimes there are things that are tough that we have to do in training. I don't think training should ever be strenuous. I don't think it should ever be beating you down or be mentally hard. But that would be my biggest thing, is just consistency over a longer period of time, and definitely consistently hitting those longer days. So how else do you think that people should prepare for a 50 mile coming from a 50K?
And I think one thing you just said, the consistency, and it's going to be a little bit longer of a build up to a 50 miler compared to doing something like a 50K. I think standardly, if you're going into a marathon training, 16 to 18 weeks. And I think that kind of goes true for a 50K as well. But when you're going a little bit further, depending on where your base is, you may need a little bit longer of a build to get you that safely to a 50 miler, because we're going to be doing some longer endurance efforts and more frequently than we would maybe leading up to the 50K. So having a little bit of time. I always like it when athletes come in a little bit longer than they think they need for coaching, because I feel like it's just so much easier. We're not in a panic or rush to try to build their mileage up. We can do it easily. We can listen to their body, and we can work around their daily life schedule. When athletes are coming in and crunching and saying, I want to get to a 50 miler in, let's say, 14 weeks, it's just can become really stressful for the athlete and the coach to make sure that we're, slowly implementing those changes as we move up. So that's one thing that I really like to look at, is thinking about a little bit more time preparing for that race. It's 50 miles, that's almost double, so we need to really think about that and make sure that our bodies are slowly adjusting so we're not getting into injury.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that long-term thinking is huge, because that really takes like strategy, it takes forethought, and it also takes patience, because you have to be really patient when you start week one of a 20-week build into, like a big race. But yeah, just like you were saying, like those, like a 50-mile race is definitely, it's almost double a 50K. So, it takes a little bit more forethought, it takes a little bit more planning, a lot slower of a build. Because I think we both agree that like consistency is going to be the biggest thing. So like I would rather see people consistently hit like, their typical weekly mileage for the entire 20 weeks, and then sprinkle in a couple like key sessions here and there, as opposed to like, like come in like with 12 weeks remaining, but like say, hey, I really want to like train really hard and I can handle high mileage. And it's like, well, maybe not, because, maybe your training history, you've taken a couple weeks or a couple months of break, So as coaches, we never like to, throw everything but the kitchen sink, or maybe everything and the kitchen sink at an athlete all at once, because then that leads to staleness, it leads to mental fatigue, burnout. And ultimately, like if we can have that longer term thinking, we create a safer build, we have more fun, we enjoy it better. And then that will just lead into what comes after the 50 mile, right? I feel like a lot of us in the ultra running community aren't just like one and done, like, hey, I just want to run a 50 mile and then I'm done. So I would rather see people get there healthy, get there with a slower build, with a more smart build. So that way you can take a week or two of recovery, have a good enough time, enjoy the 50-mile experience, and then say, you know what, like I'm ready to get back on the horse. Like I'm ready for the next adventure.
Yeah.
So
And it's really nice, especially when you're working long term with athletes, because you get to learn them and you get to learn how their body responds. Somebody that's first coming to me, I'm looking at and asking questions like, how much time do you have for training? Like, really, how much can you commit outside of your work and your family, so that we can be consistent, because consistency is key, right? So if I build a plan that is too much time, most likely it's not going to be consistent. So, really working and figuring that out, and figuring out what is that minimal amount of stimulus we can provide to get the adaptations that we need to get you there to the finish line on race day without overdoing it. Sometimes I feel like people think about ultras, they think about 50 miles, 100Ks, 100 miles, and they think that we're all running 20 to 30 miles back to back every weekend forever. And we're not, right? And I don't even remember the last time I did something like that. And I'm competing in 100 miles and 24-hour races, so I think rethinking that, because our culture really stresses lots and lots of LSD and lots of back to back. But I'm not sure that that's what you need to get you to the finish line. How are your thoughts on that, Reese? Would you agree, or where are you
Oh
at?
yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. I think that like ultra running in days past have just, it came from this culture of like, I just like to be outside for long days and, just going out there and getting air in the lungs and putting footsteps on the ground. Like, doesn't matter how long it takes. That's great. I love that. I am very much in tune with that. I love long days outside. I love being outside. It's something that I crave. But at the same time too, like when we're training for these like specific goals and we have other life obligations, sometimes we can't just say like, oh yeah, I'm going to do 40 hours a week, working, and I'm going to do 40 hours a week training, like LSD style, long, slow distance style. and then, not have the rest of my life fall apart because your kids need you, you have other obligations, maybe you have a couple jobs, maybe you're, like you need to uphold family obligations. So I think that's where, like we can definitely take from these long runs and definitely use them strategically, as well as using some speed work days that like don't take quite as long, but still give you like an incredible aerobic stimulus. So I guess like in the build up, if we can plan somebody's like 16 to 20 week build, that's when we can say like, okay, like this, like 4 weeks here, we're going to be doing a lot of volume. We're going to be doing a lot of base building. Maybe you're going to have a 10-hour week commitment into your schedule, but then don't worry, because after those 4 weeks, we're going to scale back down to 7 hours a week, but start sprinkling in some workouts, some speedier type of sessions. And whenever we say speed work, I know some alarm bells might be going off, like, I don't want to be running 200 and 400 meters on the track. It's like, no, that doesn't always mean speed work. Sometimes speed work is just that tempo 7 out of 10 intensity for 20 minutes within an hour long run. Sometimes that speed work just means doing a fartlek of like, hey, maybe on the uphills, you're just going to push it a little bit harder than easier, or whatever it is, something to click your legs over a little bit faster, make your lungs work a little bit harder, things like that. So, but I do also kind of want to define that consistency piece, because I think a lot of people are like, oh yeah, I would be really consistent, but I'm only running 3 days a week. Or I would be really consistent, but I'm running 2 days a week, and then 2 other days a week I bike, and then 1 day a week I play tennis. So, I mean, like 2 days a week of running isn't consistent, right? And I think the big thing here is that like consistency really means that like you are using the principles of progressive overload. So maybe you start week 1 and you run 2 days a week and you have tennis 2 days a week or whatever it might be. Then week 2, maybe you're running 2 days a week and have tennis 2 days a week, but we add just a little bit of extra onto those 2 days worth of running. So we're progressively scaling up the amount of work that your body is doing through the weeks while taking cut back weeks. So consistency doesn't mean like, hey, you're running 7 days a week or you're running 5 days a week. It just means like, hey, let's take whatever your body is accustomed to right now and start to build on that smartly so that you don't get injured. And that way we can progress to these bigger goals that you might have.
Right. And then I think the next piece you mentioned is, that speed and that tempo work. Sometimes I think that we feel like as ultra runners, we just run long and slow. But in order to make us better ultra runners, that we can run long and slow and maintain a faster pace while keeping our body in check, we need to sprinkle in some of that speed work and that tempo work, right? So when I'm planning something out, so if I were looking at a 50K, it may be a little bit more sprinkled in together, where we're doing tempo and faster interval work, where we may focus on that more, because if we look at running a 50K, it's a faster race, or that's kind of where the intention is, right? Be it it's a shorter distance, you can have a little bit faster leg turnover. But then we're looking at the 50 mile, the pace slows down a bit, right? But we still want to, a ways out from the race, take some time to raise that ceiling, right? By working on that faster interval work, whether it be through strides or hills, whatever source that we want to do to kind of stimulate those faster twitch muscles, and working on the leg turnover, right?
Yep.
And I think the other thing that's key there is, if you keep doing because a lot of times you hear I think a little wives' tale that if I run ultras, I'm going to get slow. Well, if you run ultra smart and train smart, you're not necessarily going to slow down your other paces. And I think one of the keys is keeping strides built in throughout your training blocks and cycles, so that you can keep that faster leg turnover.
Exactly. I really like that. It's just like when you learn something, right? Like when you learn how to play the piano or play guitar, you learn facts, whatever it is. It might take a little while for that information to get stuck inside your head, but then if you never use it, eventually you're going to forget it. And it's very similar to your muscles, your tendons, your whole skeletal muscular system, even your aerobic system. Sometimes you just got to give it these little reminders every once in a while, once you kind of build up a certain level of speed, to just remind it like, hey, we need this. And I do like that you mentioned that, like any race, whether it's a 5K or 100 miles or anything outside or in between, it's all on this aerobic continuum, this aerobic spectrum. So oftentimes we'll say like, oh, I'm aerobic or I'm anaerobic, or like I'm taxing my creatine phosphate system, whatever it is. We kind of put this aerobic continuum into buckets, but realistically, like it is one entire spectrum. So I really like thinking, just like any spectrum, your parameters are at different points of the spectrum. So maybe we are skewing, since you're running 50 miles, it requires a lot of endurance. So we're skewing and making a majority of your running in that type of endurance effort. But that doesn't mean that all of it is in that endurance effort, because we still have this top end that is craving some attention as well. So maybe I think that's where, like, the principles of like 80-20 training, where 80% of your running is at that easy, like quote unquote, like zone 2 out of a 5 zone model, or zone 1 out of a zone 3 model type of training, where you're going easy, you're building mitochondria, you're teaching your body how to use oxygen efficiently, you're collecting heartbeats without stressing your skeletal muscular system too much. But then that 20%, you still have to keep reminding that body, like, hey, we might be doing a lot of long and slow to prepare us for this really long race, but we still need to remember what it's like to turn the legs over fast. Because if you can't turn your legs over fast on flat or uphill in training, like, what makes you think that you're going to get to mile 30 or mile 40 and hit the downhill and be able to turn your legs over to go downhill? So I think that's another big thing is, when we're transitioning from that 50K to that 50-mile race, yeah, for sure, it's going to be 18 miles longer. Your overall average pace is going to be a little bit slower, but that doesn't mean that we're training only at slow paces. So I think that's a
Right.
really good summary there.
Right, I agree. And I think another good point that you make is that 80-20. We want to make sure that we are doing 80% of our training, and that slower, easy recovery pace, that's going to help us be able to maintain the volume, because we're not constantly pushing too hard where we're getting fatigued and not able to recover. So I think, that's a really important part, whatever distance you're training for, right, is that you're making sure that you're running your easy runs easy. And then on the opposite end, you're running your that other 20% moderate to hard, so those are, really, I think, simple things to think about, but often I think misinterpreted and not really applied the way it would work best for you.
Absolutely. I always tell my athletes, on your easy days, like don't even pay attention to pace, because you're really just out there to collect heartbeats and put them in the bank. So I know a couple of my athletes get a kick out of that, because it's like it's the truth. I mean, on your easy days, those are supporting days for your hard days. So if you're on your support days, you're going too hard, and now your hard days can't be as hard as it needs to be to give your body the stimulus to adapt to, then you just get stuck in this gray zone of training where your easy runs are too fast, but your hard runs are way too slow to really give you like any type of change. Your body's not really getting recovery, but it's also not getting stimulus to get any better. So easy days, like, take them easy, go out for mileage, just get your feet used to turning over, breathe some oxygen, collect some heartbeats. So that way on those key days, you can go out and hit it a little bit harder. So I know for my athletes, like when I program, like easy runs, they all say easy. And then the key days are usually like, it'll say like tempo, or it'll say like steady state or whatever. So I always tell my athletes, like, anything that doesn't say easy, I want you to prepare for. Usually I'll do like a Tuesday workout, maybe a Thursday workout, and then Sunday long run.
Right.
So I always tell my athletes, if you are so beat on your Monday afternoon that you think that going out for a run is just going to be slow, it's not going to be fun, like, then just skip it, because really it's that Tuesday that's going to be the important day for you to actually go and get better. So whether we're training for 50Ks or 50 miles, I think that principle of easy days easy, so that way your hard days and your specific days can be really dialed in to get you ready for that race, is critically important.
I completely agree. And I kind of just tell my athletes on those easy days, just go out and move your legs. That's all you want to do, is just let your legs move, so you're comfortable, you're feeling good, something you could maintain all day long. It's just a comfortable automatic pace, I feel like. So, yeah. So I think when, we're looking at training, so, the furthest out from the race, I'm going to be really focusing on more of those shorter intervals, maybe under 5 minutes, whether it's through stride work or whether it's through some intervals or hill repeats. And then, and I generally start that spectrum with more light strides, getting your body used to it, especially if I have athletes that aren't used to speed work, so that they can slowly adapt to that, and even doing maybe those strides on a slight hill, so that you're not overdoing it with too fast too soon, and kind of building up from there. You don't want to start out with a really hard speed work if you have never been doing it, because first of all, you're going to be really sore, and you're also maybe injured. So, slowly building into that. And then that is the training cycle that's going to be probably the smallest, in your entire build to your 50 miler, right? So, and depending on how much time we have, if we have more time, we might be able to devote a little bit more time to working on speed if we have more time to get you prepared. And I think that that's kind of what's important is oftentimes athletes might think about starting to train for a race a little bit late and they kind of miss out on some of those opportunities because now they're in a spot where they really need to focus on endurance because that is key to your race, but those other building blocks could have really helped you, get even better and to the finish line even more comfortably. I think if you can work on and raise that ceiling when you have that opportunity, right? So then
Yeah.
like the next cycle kind of transitioning into working on more of that tempo threshold type work. And then then we kind of get into that last section, depending on how much time and how long these events are that you're doing, is really looking at that endurance block. And that's where some people start building in more of that back-to-back long runs or those extra long runs to get you ready for race day. And I think that some of those extra long runs, for me personally, it's not as much about physical adaptation. It's a lot about mental adaptation, as being out there on the trails for a bit longer than a few hours, right? And getting used to that and practicing nutrition and hydration, because those pieces, nutrition, hydration, and the mental aspect are some of the biggest things why people DNF, right? So we really want to practice those and feel comfortable as we can going in, knowing that it's going to get hard, but kind of having some experience with preparing and trying it on your training runs.
So when you're taking an athlete through like a 50-mile training program, what do you think about either back-to-back days or like a 3-day training camp? Like, is it necessary or is it kind of optional in your opinion?
So I don't necessarily think it's necessary. I think it's an option that we can look at. I think we have to be careful and think about risk reward. Pushing and doing too many back to backs or 3 back to backs in a row is, could be edging on injury. I think you have to look at each athlete individually and how healthy have they been, going into this training block and kind of look at what really is going to be the benefit for doing that. The same way with, doing a really extra long run. Sometimes I feel like I have some athletes that need that mentally. They really need that in order to feel comfortable going into a longer effort. And so I like to have conversations with my athletes about their comfort level. Like, how do you feel? I feel like you can, run X amount and you're going to be just great and going to get you to the finish line. But is that going to make you comfortable mentally to get you to the finish line? Or do you feel like you need a little bit longer long run, or you need a back-to-back long runs, a few to get you to the finish line? What's your thoughts on that, and how do you approach that with your athletes?
I mean, I personally, for the 50-mile distance, I don't think they're necessary. I think that we can navigate around them, but I do think that they are. If you can work them into your schedule, I do think that they provide a really good benefit for training. For example, I have an athlete right now. Shout out to Dylan. He is actually out in Nairobi right now on a kind of almost, I want to say like an expedition. He's with his school. He's with his professors. He's in college doing some research out there. So amazing opportunity. So he's been out there for like 3 weeks or so. And like for those 3 weeks, it was kind of hard for me to plan his training because I don't know, like I don't want to take time away from him and the experience. And I don't have to want him to worry about like, oh, like coach wants me to do like X, miles on this day, but like it's 8 p.m. and I haven't even gotten out the door yet because I've been busy all day, things like that. So that was a challenge for me personally as a coach, but he knows really well too. We've been working together for a while now, like my philosophy on different, on how to structure particular days. So he's been doing a good job just kind of like freewheeling it. I think I did a good job teaching him how to. So shout out to Dylan. You've been learning a lot. That's amazing. But he's going to be coming back on Sunday. And originally when I scheduled out his entire, like this kind of block that we're doing, I initially envisioned like, oh, we would come back on Sunday. And then by the next weekend, we would do some back-to-back long runs. But I was looking back at his training and I was like, man, the longest run that he did was at the beginning of June and it was about 16 miles. So I thought to myself when I initially planned this, oh, we could build up to the point where we're doing like a 16 on Saturday and maybe like an 18 on Sunday, you know. But there were a couple sessions that he wasn't able to get out in Kenya. The stress of travel, getting back to the family, taking that next week a little bit slower, a little bit more mellow. I sent him a message a couple days ago, just like, hey, you know, what are you thinking about a back-to-back this next week? And then earlier this morning, I texted him back. I was like, you know what, let's just scrap that idea, because I would rather have you go into your next race feeling confident and feeling like you don't have any aches or pains. Now, here's the thing with his next race is he is racing a 50K, but we are using that 50K as a B race for his 50 miles. This is a good example of somebody who's going from that 50K distance to that 50 mile. He's going to be running Hennepin 50 mile. So I'm really excited for him. But I think it brings up another point of like, hey, like these back-to-back long runs, if we can fit them in and we can do it with without being too injured, that is fantastic. But if there's a lot of life stress, if there's a lot of travel, if there's a lot of family things that are going on, it's not completely necessary. Don't worry about it. Just worry about, again, that consistency piece. I would rather have him be consistent for the next couple of weeks, as opposed to him thinking like, hey, like you got to hit this back to back, because that's going to be the make or break of your 50K. That's not the truth whatsoever. What's the truth is him continually getting out there, you know, every few days, putting in his mileage, feeling good, feeling strong and ready and excited for the 50K. Now, another good point is with the 50-mile distance, when you're transitioning from 50K to 50 mile, I think that is a really good opportunity to be using a 50K as a training race. I think if you're going to race a 50K or below, you don't necessarily need a training race going into it, right? You know, unless you want. I mean, it's fun to race like a half marathon in preparation for a marathon, just to kind of see where your fitness is. You could even do the same thing, race a half marathon to gauge where your 50K fitness is, because the marathon and the 50K are pretty close. But at the same time too, if you're preparing for a 50 mile, I think those 50K races are a good training opportunity, because we need to go into these races, these bigger races, already being, I want to say, desensitized to the race atmosphere, right? Because I think we've all been there where it's your first race, your butterflies are on high, you're looking at the big arch, the banner where everybody's lining up, your heart's pounding, you're already at like, you know, like zone 2 before you even step to the line, you know, because your heart's going so much. So I think, you know, having these races where, you know, we're telling our athletes like, hey, you know what, go there. We're just going there to collect experience. We're just going there to, you know, finish strong and practice a good racing strategy, I think is huge, just because then you get used to the butterflies. You get used to, hey, what am I going to eat the night before? But you don't have all this pressure of like, this is what the year has led up to, you know? Right. So plus then, I mean, a 50K is still a long time to practice nutrition and practice fueling, and then just have the support of people around you, the racing environment to help push you along. So what do you think about training races for 50Ks or 50K to 50 mile?
So for me, I don't think training races in any distance are necessarily necessary. Again, I think it's more of a mental thing. And I do think that they can be valuable as far as practicing your nutrition, your hydration, all of those things that are going to come into play on race day. But I don't think it's something that you have to do. You know, for some people, it becomes more of a stressor than a help, right? Thinking about logistics and, you know, planning for that race day that might take them away from their family, or, you know, travel and all of that. And so sometimes it might not be as beneficial because it's all of the stress comes into play. So I think it depends on each individual person as to how is that going to work as far as logistics for them. I don't think it's a necessary thing to do to go into that race. I mean, I'm curious, what was your first ultra distance?
My first ultra?
What was it?
I guess it was a first race or first like effort.
Either.
Okay, so my first race was, I think, in 2018. It was a 6 hour and I went 39 miles. So that was a Badgerland Striders event that's held in September. It's a Badgerland Striders 6 hour lap of Peak Park. So, you know, oh shoot, what was my tangent? Oh, the way that I like, and where does that question come from? I'm just curious.
I was just kind of curious to kind of think about, you know, where it looked like for us. I mean, my first was a training run, and I did 40 miles. So, you know, I had done one marathon, and a few years later, you know, ran this 40 miler. So I was just kind of curious, like, did you have build, or did you kind of just go with what you were excited about?
Yeah, so I went with what I was excited about. And since I knew it was a 6 hour event, a lot of my training was like, hey, let's get up to 3 and 4 and 4.5 hours in training just to see what it feels like. And then I knew that like, hey, that last hour and a half or so, like nobody's going to feel good. Nobody's going to feel fresh. But, you know, like if I come to the start line, like ready and hungry for it, then I can push myself. And I want to say that's probably the hardest I've ever pushed myself. Like I fought so hard to the end of the line. Even though there was nobody like behind me, it was just a 6-hour event, you know? And it was one of those things where I just viscerally remember like trying to move my legs faster and it not happening, trying to breathe harder and it was not happening. But you know, I guess the way that I always approach my athletes when I ask them about training races is when I go and I schedule out their blocks. Like a lot of people come to us and they say like, hey, my big event, my 50 miler is in October, but they come and they start training in April, you know, so you have 6 months. So I personally think that's super, like mentally, it's almost a little dangerous because you have 6 months. And if you spend all 6 months just focusing on that 50-mile fitness, like we were talking about, your body's going to get stale of it. It's going to want change. It's not going to reap any more adaptations to a certain point. So that's why we kind of periodize the year. We start with some speed and then we go into some tempo and then maybe some long, steady things, training, practicing the law of specificity, working on things that aren't quite as specific away from the race, specific towards the race, right? So when I go and an athlete says, yeah, I have this race in like 6 months, I usually ask them like, well, do you want to do other training races or do you have an eye on some other things? And some people will say like, oh yeah, like I want to race like some other races during the year, but like, I just know that like, this is my like a race, but they don't really know exactly what else they want to do. So what I'll do is then I'll kind of structure like, okay, like here's this 6 month, like for this month, we're going to work on this, for this month, we're going to work on that, for this month, we're going to work on such and such. But at the end of each kind of block for each different zone, I'll say like, hey, this is a great, you know, time to like go find a trail half marathon and go race it pretty hard and have fun. Or like around this time would be a good time to do a 50K training race if you want. There's no pressure, but you know, it would be good experience to get to the line. So I think, you know, as coaches now we can kind of strategically throw in these races to say like, hey, you know, like this is where your training has led up to. If we're going to take a week or two of downtime anyways, like, hey, why not go have some fun with the fitness that you've been building? As long as it's done safely, right? Like if somebody's going to build up for like a 50 miler, I don't really want them racing like hard about like 8 weeks out or so, because, you know, like I want somebody to race like, you know, maybe, you know, at bare minimum, like not like don't race 6 weeks to your 50 mile, because then what's going to happen is whatever training race we do before that 50 mile, we want to make sure we have some time to recover, but then we also want to make sure that we have maybe 3 to 4 weeks where you can kind of work on those weaknesses that you found in that other race, and then a week or so to start scaling it down for a taper before you race the 50 mile. So I think, you know, people are going to use that strategy. You really don't want to make it too close, because what's really hard is when that race is 2 or 3 weeks away and you come out of it a lot more tuckered than you think. You know, you're not able to get your wheels back underneath you. You don't have, you know, any more long runs under your belt. Because I know personally for me, after, you know, kettle, it's like you take like 2 weeks of like, you know, I did like maybe like 10 mile. I think it was about 2 weeks and I did my first like 20 miler again, you know, and it's like, well, if it was 2 weeks and then I had another long race, that wasn't even really time enough to see like, how's my body going to handle these longer distances? Because now I'm finding that like, hey, although I can get up and I can go run, you know, like my body really doesn't want to run too fast or go too long right now, you know? So, if anybody's been following my Strava, there's been a couple workouts, I think like 2 or 3 now. I title them workout bailouts, because it's like I have this idea of like, I either want to go run some intervals or practice my speed, or I want to do some like threshold or tempo or whatever it is. And then like it comes time, it's the middle of my workday, I change into my clothes, I get out the door, I take a nice deep breath of air and I go, the legs just don't want it today, you know? So instead of doing those hard workouts, I'll be doing, you know, like I'll be getting out and getting my legs turning over, breathing through my nose, enjoying the day. I think yesterday at my workout bailout, like I was enjoying the day, sang some songs, like said hi to people, you know, like just soaked in the warmth in the sun. So I think that like when we get caught in this trap of like, hey, we only have 2 or 3 weeks to race it, maybe sometimes you don't even know like how your body is going to bounce back from that race, especially if it's, you know, if you don't have a really deep racing experience, or, you know, if you don't have a lot of 50Ks under your belt before going into that 50 mile. Some people who have done nothing but race like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 50Ks, whatever it is, they kind of know like, you know, like more often than not, like 2, 3 weeks after, like I'm A-okay, like I'm ready to hit it again hard. then you can get a little bit more dangerous with your training. But yeah, as a good principle, I would just tell people like, like 8 weeks preferably, but no closer than 6 weeks if you wanted to take some downtime and then build back into the race.
Right. So I think you said a few key points. I think one, you titled them training races. And I think that that's something to think about. So when we're looking at the races that people are doing, and, oftentimes we might call them an A or B or C race, or I even will just call it a training race to kind of get that in your head. Because if you go out and say, I'm going to do this 50K as a training race, and you go out and it's an all out effort, that's two different things, right? Training race would not be an all out effort because you don't do all out in a training run, right? So I think that's one thing. So for me, I am normally do not do training races because I'm not good at that. I would be pushing the pace too fast on a race like that. So, I think it also knowing your athletes and how they are going to approach those races are one thing. I also like to talk to them, and the same for you, like looking at that training block and go, okay, if there are races that you're considering, let's talk about them so we can see where we can really plug in some races nicely. So oftentimes I'll suggest like look up some races and then let's talk about it. Let's see how it's going to fit into your schedule. I also, of course, when we're in the off season and we're planning for the next year or the next couple of years of racing, kind of plan those out too, so that they can work nicely into your schedule so that they can benefit your A race versus maybe hinder your A race by making it too close together. So I think ideally, like really thinking that out is really smart rather than just plugging in a bunch of races and not really having meaning for those races. I think it's better if we kind of think through. It's not that we can't have fun and throw in 5Ks and 10Ks. Sometimes that can take the place of a tempo run or some speed work too. So, and that's the way I would adapt it into somebody's weekly schedule if that's what they were doing too.
Exactly. Yeah. I like that idea of like, hey, racing hard isn't necessarily building fitness. Like a lot of times, like we've all heard those stories of people who say like, oh, I don't really do a lot of like speed work. I just race my way to fitness. And I don't think that really holds true in today's like day and age. And like the physiology behind it doesn't make sense, because if you are going to like the idea of racing means that like you're pushing yourself hard. You're either trying to go for a goal that, that you've been working on for a while, or you're trying to go for a finish that maybe you're chasing cutoffs for. Either way, it's going to be a serious effort on your body, which is going to take like serious recovery afterwards. And I think that's something that we can't like as much as we try, as often as we hit the foam roller, as much yoga as we do, you just can't always expedite the recovery process of muscles, bones, tendons, ligaments, the endocrine system, the neurotransmitter system. So I think, yeah, that's great. And, like shout out to Greg Williamson. He's got a 50K coming up this weekend. He's one of my athletes. He's got QMT, Quebec Mega Trail. He's out there killing it right now, but he probably thinks that I'm a broken record, because when I'm texting him, when I'm emailing him, I'm telling him like, hey man, like B race, like we're going out there for a strong finish. Take the first half, like really slow, like, like hike the uphills, jog the flats, be smooth on the descents. Don't roll an ankle, because I want you feeling like you're only gaining momentum to the end, but by all means, don't go all out, So he's doing, he's doing great with that. But I always think that my athletes are like, oh, there comes the broken record again, So yeah, that's something huge. And, like anybody here that's working with a coach or is thinking about it, like that's something that like the coach athlete relationship needs, is that open communication, that, that thing where, like I know that when I tell my athletes something, they don't take it condescendingly. They take it constructively. They take it as a reassurance or a reiteration of a key important idea of why we're going here. Because it is, or why we're going to a particular race, because it is pretty important to, take those training runs as good efforts, but not as all out, right? So I think to kind of summarize our past couple points, like back-to-back long runs can be beneficial depending on the athlete, but are by no means necessary. And same with training races. I think training races can be beneficial if they're taken the right way, but again, are by no means necessary. I guess I kind of want to transition now into like race day, when you're racing a 50 mile versus you're racing a 50K. You're pushing yourself, or you're chasing cutoffs, or you're trying to go for your particular time, or you're at the front of the pack, whatever it might be. What has to happen differently throughout the course of the day in order to ensure success?
So, I mean, I think first of all, going in with a solid race strategy, how am I going to approach this course? I think when you're going into any race, really looking at the course and the logistics of the course is super important to be successful on race day. So, going in that maybe it's a hilly course. And so you're going to be doing a lot of power hiking up the hills, and maybe you're going to be running the flats and the downhills. Or maybe it's a flat course and you're going to go with some sort of a time walk run method. Or maybe you're going to just maintain a pace that's something that you can maintain for the full 50 miles and keep that, run the entire distance, right? So I think you have to look at each individual and what their goals are and what their abilities are to get them to the finish line. So that's going to look different for everybody, right? So I think thinking about that. And then when we're looking at a 50-mile race, we're looking at logistics. We could be looking at, maybe I have a crew today that's supporting me. Maybe I have drop bags that I'm going to use to get me through. Maybe I'm going to carry all of my stuff, just depending on what the logistics of that race is, are things that you really need to think about going into a 50-mile race. When you were in that marathon or that 50K, you might have been able to throw a few gels in your pocket and call it good. Now we're in a 50-mile, we're not going to be able to do that, right? We're going to need more hydration, we're going to need more nutrition, electrolytes to get us through the day. So I think thinking about race strategy and that hydration nutrition piece are going to be huge when you're going into race day and getting on that line and deciding how you're going to pull that all off.
Yeah, I think that's big. And that kind of like in my brain, I kind of lump that into like self-care. And I think that like your self-care needs to not only be better, but in a 50-mile race, you also need to plan a little bit more for things that you may need, but not necessarily like have are currently using during training, right? Because during training, maybe we're building up to 20 miles, maybe we're building up to 25 miles, whatever it is. Maybe we're doing back-to-back long runs, but we don't always know what our body is going to need then come mile 30, 40, and then to the finish. So I think for a lot of people that are building up in distance, right? Like I always take an effort-based approach, and I tell my athletes like, hey, you want to maintain that easy effort and you want to pack more things than you think you're going to need, because I want to make sure that my athletes finish that 50-mile with a good experience, right? If it's your first time at a race, there's no sense in putting like a particular pressure on yourself, So carrying more gels than you think you need, I think is a good idea. Having more storage capacity for things. Say if you're at an aid station and you're like, like I really want a couple Oreos, but I shouldn't slam 5 of them right now. Maybe you carry a couple extra bags on you, so that way you can pack some stuff and sneak it down the trail. So I think self-care needs to be a little bit more dialed. I think that's when we need to start getting into the habit of like, hey, we're going to be fueling 20 to 30 minutes, or we start like really dialing in with the athlete, like, hey, like you need to be practicing some sort of nutrition. I think, there's a lot of people that can get by on 12 and 15-mile runs and have lackluster nutrition because you get home, you're not completely exhausted, but you're incredibly hungry, right? So I don't think that like, the nutritional strategy between a 50K and a 50-mile is the same. I mean, personally, whether I'm running 100 miles or 50 miles, it's like, I know I need to be getting in about like 300 to 400 calories per hour, whether that's gels, goos, chomps, cookies, whatever it is. But the thing is now you really can't slack on that stuff because it's really going to bite you in the end. So sometimes, eating and just nibbling, like nibble small portions before you're really hungry and just delaying that bonk. Because by the time you've bonked, by the time your thinking is getting kind of foggy, that's when we start to get into that danger zone of like, hey, you're low on calories. Maybe you're on a trail that you don't really know. Like you can't really afford to be foggy on thinking and go off trail or make a mistake or not be putting in the calories that you need. So I think, like effort is a really great way to treat these first 50-mile races is, hey, let's make sure, like, let's say the first like 25 miles, you are having a good time. You're smiling, you're enjoying the day. If you're ever not, that means something's wrong, right? If you're not enjoying the day, then maybe you need to eat more. Like during these ultra races, bad mood to eat food. Maybe you need to be hydrating more. Maybe you need to cool off more. So during that first half of the race, we're really taking attention to going easy, to making sure you're taking care of yourself, to ensure that by the second half of the race, you are relatively fresh. And by that, I mean, you're going to have some of those ultra aches and pains. Your hips are going to be kind of bugging at you a little bit, but you shouldn't be like feeling like you're fighting, to stay in it. Right.
You have another half of the race to go, right? And
Yeah.
then back to, I always say fresh at 50 in a 50-mile, fresh at 25 is, is a great goal to have. And if you get there feeling pretty good, you've kept up on your nutrition, your hydration, and you haven't went out too fast. Your pace has been a good effort, all day. So
Your
I think that's
stomach's not going sour. You're not overheating. Like you
fingers
have
are swelling.
exactly. That's a real big one for me. Finger swelling is a good sign I need some more sodium for sure. Bad mood for me. If I'm ever like, oh, why am I out here? What am I doing? Like, like, am I going too fast? Like, oh, it just kind of sucks now. Like all of those like emotions in me, I know are just because I need more food.
Yep.
So
Yep.
the second I have more food, I'm like, this is great. I love this. I love being outside.
Yes.
So, yeah,
And
I
I
think,
Yeah, and I think that, a good point too to think about is when you're training, you need to treat it like you are running a 50-mile race, right?
yeah.
So that when you're going out on your long run, you're starting from the very beginning of your long run and you're doing an IV drip of food and hydration right from the beginning. And you're, trying to get in your calorie, whether it's 250 or 300 or 350, whatever it is, your goal is, you're trying to get that in from the very first hour that you start your training. Now, do you really need that much in a 2 or 3 hour training run? Probably not, but you do because you need to train your gut and you need to train your mind that's what you're going to do come race day. So I think sometimes people kind of overlook that and go, well, I don't start until mile 2 or hour 2 of my long run because I don't need anything. But that's not the point of,
Yeah.
of
And I kind of want to push back on this a little bit too. So you said that like maybe you don't need something, for 2 or 3 hours. I think that everybody needs something, but sometimes I think your ability to understand if you like when you need it or not kind of varies, right? Because I think there's a lot of people that can get out there and go for 2 or 3 hours and not think that they need anything.
Yes,
But
absolutely.
really, your body needs energy. Your body needs carbohydrates. When you go out for a training run and it's 3 hours, maybe you get home and maybe you're like, oh yeah, I'm fine. But then you have such a caloric deficit that now your body isn't in the state of repair. It's in the state of consume and assimilate food. So now you're delaying your recovery for a couple hours, right? So I think that I think everybody needs something, but I think that sometimes our perceptual ability to understand that need is lackluster. So for a lot of my athletes, I always, like once we're in that like 6 to 8 week window and we're getting really specific, you're training for a 50-mile, it has X elevation gain. I'm telling my athletes like, hey, like go out on a hilly course in this mileage. I want you to get around this elevation gain. And I also want you to be using everything. I want your pack on you. I want your arm sleeves on you. I want you going out there and eating what you plan to eat. Go out there with a couple experimental foods just in case, like, you don't have your calories on hand, so like use the things that you're going to be using and that you plan on using, but then also practice that adaptability piece. So that's where I think, in 50 miles, you definitely need to get pretty specific as the race comes close to just mimicking like, hey, what am I going to experience on race day? Like, for people that don't practice like fueling, like let's say you go out there with some gummy bears and, Roctane for your nutrition, whatever it is. Those are just two examples that came to mind right away. Like there's a lot of people who say like, I can't handle the taste of that for like 3 hours or whatever it is. And it's like, okay, well then why is that your strategy? Why do you think that's what you're going to do come like a 10 or 11 or 12-hour race, So I think that's where, just like you said before, we got to be training our stomach. We got to be training our taste buds. We got to be practicing with that stuff in the weeks leading up just to get our body used to what it's going to experience on race day.
Right, absolutely. And, we don't have to eat the exact same thing for the entire 50 miles, right? You can have a plan that's varied as well, that changes as the race goes on, but you may want to make sure that whatever that plan is, you're practicing it in your training runs as well, so that you're used to all of those different foods in your gut. I think another thing to think about, depending on what time of day the race starts, you may need a headlamp in the early morning, or maybe it's a night race and you're going to need a headlamp at night. So throwing in training runs that involve night running or dark running, I think is super important too, because it might not be something you thought of when you ran a marathon or a 50K, because you might not have gotten into the darkness.
Oh, that's great. My mind wasn't even going there, but that is so true. As these races get longer, we're going to be out there for like a longer time. So we got to think about those variables. And just on that similar vein, maybe we're thinking about not just being outside for the morning, right? Like let's say you start at 6 and you get done with your 50K at like noon or 1 or 2 or 3 p.m. That's awesome. But what if you do a 50 mile and now we're talking about 12 plus hours? Well, if it's in September or October and you start at 8 a.m., now you're talking about being out there till like 8 p.m., 9 p.m., whatever it is, right? And it gets dark at like 4 p.m. So you're going to be going through these temperature gradients. You're going to be going through light gradients. So I think that's huge too. Yeah, get out there for your early morning runs, get out there for your midday runs, get out there for some evening runs. It doesn't have to be anything impeccable. It doesn't have to be like a long run in the morning and I need a long run in the afternoon and I need a long run in the evening. But maybe it's just like, hey, after work, you go out for like 20 or 30 minutes and just feel what it feels like to be out there when the sun is setting.
Right.
Or do 30 minutes in the morning with a headlamp to just get your legs used to clicking over immediately after waking up, right? Because some of these races start at like 5 a.m. So you got to wake up at like 4 a.m. and like, boom, by 5, you're cruising, you know? So, and that's always tough. So just getting your body experience with that. And then you can practice the pre-race nutrition that comes with that, you know, like practice, like, okay, if I'm going to get up at 4 o'clock and go for a run in the morning today, like, should I be eating at 9 p.m. at night, or maybe I have something lighter and have a bigger lunch, you know, and kind of like experiment around that way too.
Yep. Yep. I think that's good. So anything else that you can think of? I mean, I want to say, first of all, switching to a farther distance is exciting. It's fun. It's a new challenge. So if you're motivated by it, do it, go and try it and just prepare so you can have a great day.
Oh my gosh, I think that's amazing. And I think too that like, you know, like us ultra runners, like we're pretty type A people, you know? So when we sign up for these new
Yeah.
goals, like I know for me in my head, it's like, oh my God, like this is the biggest thing. Like I have to be so prepared. And you start to put all of this stress on yourself. But like, you know what? Like new distance, have fun, go out there, see what you're capable of. You might succeed. You might set off fireworks. That's amazing. Go for it. You might, you might DNF, you might like cross the finish line with some bleeding knees and whatnot, but like, you're okay. That's fine. That's just another experience that you can put under your belt and take for the next one. Right. So I think that there is no like win or loss in these events. There's just like, hey, just go into it with an open mindset, a mindset ready to learn about yourself, about the course and the community around you. Have fun, celebrate, get cheered on by other people, cheer on other passersby, and get after it and enjoy the experience with everybody else that's going to be running the same course with you.
Right. Right. I agree. So let's wrap this up with a quick question from a listener. So first of all, we've had a lot of air quality issues, right, that's been moving across the U.S. with the wildfires in Canada and other places. For me, I've been directly impacted by Canada, living near Detroit area. Our numbers have been pretty high this week. A few weeks ago, they were also high. We've had ratings as the worst in the US, so not where we want to be, right? Number one. So we have a listener and I've had also lots of texts from my athletes, like, what do I do? The air quality is bad. What should I be doing? So let's just kind of talk about this really briefly. We're not going to go into a big discussion because we could probably talk about it all day, right? But the question is from Marv. Thank you, Marv. With the low air quality, some pointers for building cardio workouts on the treadmill, length of intervals, number of intervals, change of grade, weighted vest. So he's just kind of looking for some ideas of what can I do? I'm not going outside. What am I going to do now that I'm stuck inside? What advice would you give your athlete, Reese?
Like we debated back and forth on this one because it is such a hot topic item these days. We have like the pollution in Salt Lake, inversion layers, Los Angeles. Now it's happening with these fires. There's fires out in California right now. We know that from the Western states. Of course, that got burned up pretty well. So I guess, before we get into like recommendations or what we think, I do just want to read aloud this guideline from the EPA. So the EPA is the Environmental Protection Agency, and they created a color-coded, like 6-tiered type of visualization for what the numerical values mean. So like the AQI, the air quality index, goes from 0 to 500. Anything that is like 0 to 50 is considered satisfactory. It's safe. Air pollution is minimal. 51 to 100 is air quality is acceptable, but pollutants might be there, and it might affect individuals of a special population that might have like COPD or asthma or whatnot. 101 to 150 is going to be unhealthy for sensitive groups as well. So that's kind of where people with those types of ventilatory issues can, see the most damage or the most impact. 151 to 200 is going to be everyone may begin to experience some sort of health effect, whether that's, difficulty in breathing or ventilation, or bouts of coughing from the air, and even decreased vision. I know when it's really polluted outside, it gets pretty hazy. So that makes it hard to drive, hard to navigate. 201 to 300 is a high alert. Everybody is going to experience some sort of health effect if they're outside for a period of time. 301 to 500 is going to be extremely hazardous. Nobody should be outside. I think, to kind of summarize that, for most people who don't have any type of contraindication or any type of ventilatory disorder or sensitivity, is fairly safe 150 and below. Of course, that is always individual, and it comes down to somebody's level of risk or level of tolerance. I think if it's 200 and above, that's going to be very sensitive for a lot of people. So I think, in the Chicagoland area, I think we had 2 days that were about like 240s, 250s or so, which is extremely bad. It was very hazy. The sun was just impeccable at sunrises and sunsets because of the pollution that you could see in the air. So I think as a broad overarching recommendation as coaches, we got to say that, like, we got to give people the information and just say, hey, your air quality means that you are subject to some sort of compromisation, either to your workout or to your health. So for those days, maybe if an athlete is willing to accept the risk of going outside, like, hey, I just want to be outside, I love being out in the sun, it's okay. Maybe if they have a workout on that day where they're really going to be huffing and puffing, we scale that back. I tell them to nose breathe. Goo Energy Labs actually released this really cool article that even details that, like, hey, if you breathe through your nose on your runs, you are incorporating this filtration system of your nose just to help with some of the pollutants. Of course, it's not going to be a bulletproof plan, but at least if you go out and you exercise easily for an hour, if it's like 150 or below, you're not going to be at an extreme risk to your health. I think we also have to look at the time period. How long is this going to be happening? I think, Monday, I mean, it's been kind of foggy here for a while, and the air quality has been under 150 for a while. But as it came up, it's probably been 4 days or so where it's at a very unhealthy level, according to the AQI. So that's when we kind of say, like, hey, if this goes on any longer, maybe we do have to take all of your workouts inside. For people that are in Salt Lake or maybe in like an inversion layer, sometimes those like very unhealthy 200 plus type of AQI indexes can persist for weeks, if not like a month or so. So, if an athlete wants to stay outside and we give them the information that, like, hey, this is what the Environmental Protection Agency has given to us as a guideline. If they want to, abide by that, that is awesome. We can shift all of your workouts indoors if you have the means to. But for athletes that don't have the means to, or just want to get outside regardless, maybe we alter their exercise to be a little bit easier, because again, consistency is going to be important for any type of endurance exercise or endurance performance. So that's where I tell people, you know what, like, even though we're missing your workout, like, if you go out for like an easy hour, breathe through your nose, hydrate well, it's going to be better than exercising way too hard. But for people that do want to go inside, like, how do you modify your workouts to be better on the treadmill, right? I think that, like, hey, if somebody's going to be on a treadmill, I don't really want them running flat the entire time, because if we're trail runners and we're going to be, like, we're going to be on a treadmill that has access to like a really steep incline, maybe that's where we do some percentage intervals, where it's like, hey, maybe we do, like half mile at like a 3% grade, and then we do half mile at like a 10% grade, but we keep the effort at like a 6 to 7 out of 10 intensity, right? Just so if we're on a treadmill that has access to that incline and you live in a flat Chicagoland area, well then, hey, we're making use, because we're giving your body something that you don't typically do on your regular just hour-long cruise around town type of runs, right? So for us trail runners that do love to be outside, maybe that's a good way that you can say, like, hey, yeah, it sucks being on the treadmill, but look at this, I'm being more race specific, I'm preparing a little bit better right now. Otherwise, if people are just going to do their flat runs, their flat easy runs, I never like to have my treadmill at 0%, because there is a sort of enhancement from the belt. So when you are clicking over 0% going, 6 miles an hour or so on the treadmill, it's not the same energy demand as going 6 miles an hour just on flat ground, because the belt's kind of propelling itself to a certain degree. So I usually always, like my athletes to be at like 1 or 2% just to mimic like that flat ground, unless it's like a warm up. Sometimes I'll have my athletes warm up at 0% just to kind of get the legs clicking for a mile. But I never like to do all of my running at 0%. So if that helps other people out there, if you are just going to click off the mileage, set it at like 1 to 2% just to mimic that muscular demand of what it feels like to propel yourself on flat ground. That's fantastic. Otherwise, if you're looking to get fancier, do some uphill repeats, do some walking to hiking intervals. I do like that on treadmills. When you instantly set, you go from like 1% to 12%, it's not instant, right? Like it kind of takes you through this gradual incline. And I think that's great mimic for, like these hilly races that we have, because oftentimes we're never running at 0% incline and then all of a sudden hit 12% in a trail race, right? It's kind of this gradual swoop up. So I think that's a great way to, doing these intervals back and forth, you can start to practice those transitions between like, hey, what does it feel like to be cruising on like relatively flat ground and then transition into that hike without making it too stochastic. Making it nice and smooth is always going to be a good thing. So I know that was a lot, but how do you recommend to your athletes when they come to you and they ask about the AQI?
So, I mean, I'm pretty much on the same page. I mean, I feel like everybody has to make that decision for themselves. I like to give them the knowledge that goes with that and then have them to decide what they're going to do. I know I have a lot of athletes that are running inside and or working out inside. I fully support that. I have some that are still outside and I support that as well if that's their decision. Again, I think you're right. I think it's a smart decision if you're going to be outside to change that workout to an easy like zone 2 versus doing a tempo or interval work in this, because I think that the chances of getting more of the particles in your lungs when we're breathing harder is going to be more impactful at that point. But I also think that we have some people that are in a situation that may not have workout equipment available to them. If they don't want to go outside, a couple days off is not going to decrease your fitness. It's going to be okay. And hopefully it's going to get better. I do think though, over the summer that this might be something that's kind of reoccurring for us, depending on which way our wind is blowing, right? Whether we're getting a lot of the, poor air quality or whether it's improving. And so, we might be dealing with this throughout the summer. So I think everybody's going to kind of have to make a decision of what they're going to do. They are saying that you could wear the N95 masks. Reese and I were talking about this a little bit before, but the effectiveness and if it, is placed on your face so that it is doing the work that it is intended, plus wearing a mask is, we've been there not too long ago with COVID, wearing masks while we were out running, but that's, could be another option to help sort of, with those particles, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And even this article by Goo Energy Labs, and we can link this in the description too, says that the KN95 masks are going to be they do have a certain capacity to filter some of those tiny particles, but depending on how it's fit around your face, depending on how old the mask is itself, how much use it's had, it's not always going to be 100% effective. So yeah, again, I really like that idea of giving athletes the knowledge and making it their decision, because I do think there is a certain level of autonomy that we have to take with our athletes, because everybody should be entitled to make their own decisions. I never tell my athletes you can't do anything, or you should, you have to do this, right? So if my athletes are going to choose to be outside, then okay, then I'm going to tell them why we're altering this exercise, just so that way, people can get a better stimulus for the training that they are putting in. So if that means we got to take a couple easy days or a couple off days, so that way your harder section is going to be, or your harder session is going to be in better air quality, then so be it, because you're going to get better adaptation.
Yeah, and I've even moved around some training plans. So maybe moving some rest days around on these days in hopes that the weather is going to, or the air is going to change a little bit over the weekend and we can still get in some of those workouts that we weren't able to get in yesterday or maybe the day before because the air quality was poor. I mean, I've seen numbers in Wisconsin close to 400. So, it's definitely, support your quality. So I guess my advice is to do your research, stay safe, think about yourself and what you feel is best for you. And that's the decision you go with.
Absolutely. It was great talking with you today, Loretta. Thanks for all of your wisdom. And if anybody out there thinks that we missed something when it comes to 50K to 50-mile increases in racing, let us know. Like, we'd love to hear the comments. By no means are these, hour-long podcasts meant to be, fully comprehensive, because there is so much to training. There's so much to racing, and we could talk about this forever. So let's continue the discussion in the comments. Shoot us a DM, shoot us a message. And let's keep talking and help everybody get faster.
Super. And thanks for listening. And if you could give us a like on our accounts, that would be amazing, and share. And so we can help spread some of the information to other athletes in our community and out of our community. That would be amazing.
Perfect. Thank you, Loretta. Take care, and we'll see you next week.